Ben Wiedemann in Beirut. Ben, tell us more about what you're hearing regarding this rescue operation that happened inside the Nuseirat refugee camp.
Yeah, keep in mind this is a refugee camp, Amra, that was full of people because many of them had come from the area of Rafah, where the Israelis are currently conducting an offensive, a town that's basically now a ghost town. Everybody has left, and so many of the people who were killed yesterday in Nuseirat were in fact coming from that area. Now, we just received the latest numbers from the Gaza Ministry of Health, who say that yesterday's death toll from that Israeli operation was 274, with 698 wounded. That brings the death toll since the 7th of October in Gaza, according to the Ministry of Health there, to 37,084. Now, yesterday, the scenes in the hospital were absolute pandemonium. Lots of wounded women and children. The morgues were full. They ended up having to put the dead simply on the pavement outside. We did speak to one doctor at one of those hospitals in central Gaza who told us that yesterday was the worst day of his entire professional career, which is something given what people in Gaza have seen over the last 8 months. So there is anger in Gaza, and there is a feeling that certainly that once again this shows just the completely different worlds Israelis and Gazans live in. Israelis yesterday obviously very happy with the news of the release of the freeing of these 4 hostages, but for Palestinians, yesterday was probably one of the bloodiest Israeli assaults since this war began. Amra, Victor?
Two very different perspectives there. Ben Wiedemann for us in Beirut. Thank you, Ben. We've also learned that the U.S. helped the IDF prepare for this mission.
A U.S. official says that while there were no American boots on the ground, the U.S. offered Israel intelligence support. CNN's Priscilla Alvarez has more.
The United States on Saturday commending Israel for its rescue of 4 hostages, with President Biden welcoming the news alongside the French president.
I want to echo President Macron's comments welcoming the safe rescue of 4 hostages that were returned to their families in Israel. We won't stop working until all the hostages come home and a ceasefire is reached. That is essential to happen.
A U.S. official tells CNN that an American cell in Israel supported the rescue efforts working with Israeli forces. That in reference to a team that has been assisting Israel since October 7th to information gather on hostages. But a source also confirming to CNN that there were no U.S. boots on the ground in this mission. Now, of course, the U.S. has been pushing for a hostage deal that would also include a ceasefire in Gaza. President Biden himself outlining that 3-phase proposal that, again, would include the release of all hostages and a temporary ceasefire and potentially a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. In fact, just this week, U.S. and 16 other countries urged Hamas to quote, close the deal. Just another example of the ongoing pressure by the United States. Senior U.S. officials have also been back to the region to try to give more traction to those talks. And while it's still unclear where those talks will lead, the U.S. at the very least on Saturday commending Israel and applauding what they called a successful operation. Priscilla Alvarez, CNN, Washington.
All right, let's bring in CNN military analyst and retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton and Peter Bergen, a CNN national security analyst. Welcome to you both, gentlemen. Colonel, let's start with you. And I'm struck by a couple of things. The first being that Hamas was holding these hostages inside of a refugee camp. The second, the high number of civilian casualties, though those numbers we cannot verify here at CNN, but over 200 is the word from Gaza officials. Israeli officials have that number at about half. Could this operation have been successful without this high number of civilian casualties?
Well, Amara, good morning. It depends on a variety of different factors, but generally speaking, my initial impression is that yes, it could have been successful with far fewer civilian casualties. I think one of the problems that the Israelis had was that it appears that the hostages were actually held in private homes, at least for part of the time during which they were being held captive. And that presents some other difficult problems when you're going in to conduct a hostage rescue operation. So that might have exacerbated the civilian count. Plus, of course, there was a lot of firepower the Israelis were using, and that should have probably been a lot less to achieve the same end.
You know, as this unfolded yesterday, we were live on the air as we learned about the rescue of these hostages, Peter. And of course, we were also anticipating an announcement from Benjamin Netanyahu's war cabinet member, Benny Gantz, about his resignation. And then, of course, the news came that the 4 hostages were rescued. Then that news conference was postponed. And then Benjamin Netanyahu called on Benny Gantz not to withdraw, that right now is a time for unity. What do you make of this, and why does Netanyahu need Benny Gantz?
Well, Amara, I think, it's a parliamentary system in Israel, so you need as many people in your cabinet, as possible. He doesn't have a huge sort of majority. Benny Gantz is a very popular figure. And, Benny Gantz has also, basically, I think quite rightly said Netanyahu needs to have a plan for the day after in Gaza that goes beyond just saying we don't really have a plan. I also want to return to what Colonel Leighton was saying. Look, if this was a U.S. Special Operations raid, there's, think about the Osama bin Laden raid. The Obama administration debated what to do for literally months. And one of their big considerations was dropping a bomb on the compound would kill quite a lot of people in a city, in Abbottabad. Think about also the Trump administration also debated for many, many weeks about killing the leader of ISIS in 2019 in Syria, also with the issue of civilian casualties. And look, Colonel Leighton can correct me. I don't think there's a universe where the U.S. Special Operations would have approved this raid with this level of casualties, whether it's 100, as the Israelis say, or 270, as we just learned from Ben Wiedemann. Clearly, it's an unacceptably large number of casualties. It's great that the hostages were returned, but I don't see a world in which the U.S. Special Operations community would have gone forward with this raid, knowing or having this level of potential number of casualties.
Do you agree, Colonel Leighton?
I do. I agree totally with what Peter just said, because he's right. When it comes to the planning for these kinds of operations, U.S. Special Forces are very, very meticulous, and one of the key things is to avoid those civilian casualties.
Colonel Leighton, what about the U.S. role in this? I mean, we heard there from Priscilla Alvarez reporting, that the U.S. was obviously involved with the intelligence, but what more do you know or presume in terms of how much the U.S. was involved in this?
Well, what it sounds like, based on Priscilla's reporting and some other reports, Amara, it sounds like this was an intelligence fusion cell that was set up in the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. That is a very standard practice when we're helping a country with specific military operations. We do it in countries in Asia, other countries in the Middle East. I have done it in Latin America in the past. So these are the kinds of things that we do where we bring together, fuse the intelligence, help them, the host country, look at that intelligence, add it to their own intelligence. So this seems to be that same kind of operation, and it's a multi-agency affair. It includes not just the military, but also the intelligence agencies and other elements that are necessary for that particular situation.